There was no trial, no courtroom, no jury, no justice. Just a vote and a sentence, in a sterile chamber orbiting the galactic capital. Seated beneath banners of 1,000 species, the High Council pressed a single decision into history. The screen. Read, exile, species 402H Homo sapiens. The decision was unanimous, not because all agreed on the punishment, but because all feared what might happen if humanity was allowed to continue existing freely. They were too unpredictable, too defiant, too ... stubborn. They refused assimilation. They rejected regulation. And worst of all, they fought back when they weren't supposed to. So the Council, weighed, too civilized to commit genocide and too cowardly to risk another war, devised a clean solution, banished them to a death world. Not just any a class. 0. The kind of world where starships rust within days, where gravity snaps bones, where the storms scream louder than engines. A planet so hostile that even the most adaptable life forms couldn't last a full season. A place that had no name, till the humans gave it one colon, NERF-9. The process was bureaucratic and efficient. They stripped Earth's orbital platforms, impounded the last fleet of Terran ships, and rounded up those who remained. Engineers, farmers, teachers, soldiers, anyone who still called themselves human. In total, just under 300,000. Were loaded into rust-streaked transport freighters and locked in cryo. They were told nothing. No one even explained the coordinates. The transports descended silently through clouds blackened with charged dust. Gravity doubled. The hulls groaned. As the ships neared the surface, winds shredded their stabilizers. More than a dozen freighters crashed outright, torn open like cans by the screaming wind. The others, they landed barely. No ceremony. Warning, no supplies, beyond a few crates of deactivated drones and brittle prefab shelters. When the doors opened, the humans stepped into a nightmare. The ground hissed beneath their feet, volcanic sediment that steamed with acidic fog. The air was breathable, barely. Each breath felt like sandpaper soaked in salt water. Lightning arced across the sky in pulses. The landscape buckled as tectonic plates shifted audibly beneath the soil. And in the distance, screams, not the cries of wounded animals, but guttural roars from things that had never known fear, because everything else had already died. By the third night, the brittle shelters had collapsed. By the fifth, half the drones were useless. Their circuits, fried from radiation flares. By the end of the second week, over 80,000 humans were dead. Some from exposure. Others from the predator's creatures that stalked the camps at night with teeth that shimmered like obsidian glass. A few simply vanished, dragged into the cracked earth by something unseen, and still, no one came. The Galactic Council received the initial reports, atmospheric telemetry, survivability indexes, casualty estimates. They nodded and moved on. Expected attrition, they said. Sustainable until collapse. They will not last the cycle. To them, it was already over. A punishment delivered. A problem erased. Another bureaucrat filed a report and clicked a checkbox that read, Homo sapiens, status functionally extinct. And on Nerthus-9, the storms kept howling. But there were survivors, not soldiers. Not heroes, just people. People who refused to die. They tore apart the dead drones and used the metal as heat sinks. They dug pits into the volcanic mud, lining them with plasma-baked rocks to boil water. They took shelter inside the crashed freighters, turning shattered hulls into bunkers. They learned. They adapted. They fought the wildlife with stone-weighted spears. Using broken drone lenses as targeting optics, they found edible fungus near geothermal vents and learned to trap insect herds the size of cattle a child. Barely 10 discovered how to charge a solar cell during lightning storms by attaching it to a long metal rod buried in the ground, a human-made lightning rod. Recreated from memory, they stopped trying to wait for. Rescued, and started building for survival. The world tried to kill them and failed, because what the Council hadn't understood, what their simulations never accounted for, was that humans had been born on a death world once before. They called it Earth, and they survived that. 2. Asterisk, the rain didn't fall on Nerthus 9. It stabbed. Every droplet hit like a needle of icy acid, sizzling against metal, hissing on flesh. What little atmosphere existed was saturated with fine particulates and magnetized dust that clung to lungs like ash. By the third week, the remaining survivors learned to breathe slowly and shallow to minimize the pain. Many of them coughed blood by dawn, and their skin blistered if left exposed for more than an hour. But they did not lie down. They did not surrender. They worked. Some started wearing scraps of crash wreckage as armor, pieces of hull plating bound with salvaged wiring and rubber from melted conduit lines. Others stitched makeshift cloaks from the synthetic insulation torn from defunct drone carcasses. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. On Nerthus 9, nothing was elegant. Elegance died with the first storm. 2 settlements formed, not by design, but by instinct. One near the jagged cliffs where lightning struck more often than it didn't, and another beside a sulfuric trench with steady geothermal warmth. The cliffs offered energy. The trench offered heat. That was enough. The humans dug. With hands blistered raw and fingers bloodied from jagged stone, they unearthed the land around the shattered freighters. They built pits and trenches, redirecting runoff and mud flows to avoid drowning when the sky turned to sludge. They anchored the remaining drone cores into the ground and tried, desperately, to coax even a fraction of their programming back online. It worked. Not fully. Not enough for automation, but just enough for tools. One group reprogrammed a mining drone to drag carts. Another turned a sensor pod into a weather detector by embedding it into a ridge wall and watching which way it melted. First, a salvaged medical unit, cracked and incomplete, became the core of what passed for a hospital. People gathered around it like it was sacred. The screen still blinked blue, still displayed error codes in half-lit letters. It became a symbol of hope, despite being useless. Each day was a choice between exhaustion and death. The planet offered no mercy. Storms came without pattern. Earthquakes struck like punches to the gut. Wildfires raced along the magnetic ridgelines before burning themselves out in rivers of iron-rich sludge. They lost people constantly, not in great numbers anymore, but in painful, specific trickles. A forager caught in a sinkhole. A child swept away by a landslide of hot sand. An elder crushed beneath the collapse of a rock shelter just minutes before it was reinforced, and still the humans endured. One man invented a way to cook meat using a broken reactor plate and focused shards of solar mirror. Another woman created a filtration system from nothing but rock layers and chemical fabric. No one asked for leadership. Leaders emerged through action. People followed those who moved, who bled, who got back up. Within a month, they stopped referring to their shelters as camps. They started calling them what they truly were: home. They gave the planet names. The cliff region became Sparkback Ridge. The trench was dubbed Embergat. One crater, where the largest freighter had landed and burned for days, was called the Cradle. A name meant ownership, and the humans had decided they were not just surviving. Here, they were claiming it. That was the moment it changed. Not the weather, not the biology, the mindset. They stopped looking to the sky. They stopped asking when someone would come. They started building for the long haul. Beneath Sparkback Ridge, they carved out their first underground forge. It was not beautiful. The molten vents were unstable, and the air nearly suffocated the workers. But they made tools. Real tools, not shaped stones, but alloyed blades, metal hooks, wire-stripped drills made from drone spines and melted armor panels. Someone no one remembers. Hugh scratched a phrase into the wall above the forge entrance with a scavenged bone. This world kills everything, except us. They weren't wrong. What began as desperation became method. Method became innovation. They learned that the local insectoids, whose acidic shells dissolved most materials, left behind enzyme-resistant resin when roasted in volcanic mud. That resin was quickly woven into nets, later armor, then wall plating. They learned the timing. of the dust storms could taste when one was coming by the flavor of the air. They tracked the patterns of the predators, six-legged wraiths that howled before ambushing, and baited them into deadfall traps built from entire shuttle frames. Some of the humans began tattooing themselves with soot and mineral paste, not for culture, but for camouflage. Others trained in the lightning fields, learning how to move across the terrain without triggering discharges. It was madness. Beautiful madness. The deaths continued. But so did the birth of something else. Not just resilience, dominance. One night, under a blood-orange sky, the survivors of Imbergat gathered around a fire fueled by methane gas lines they'd uncovered. They didn't speak of Earth. They didn't speak of rescue. They spoke of Nerthus, the world that tried to kill them and failed. It was no longer just a prison. It was a crucible, and what came out of it would be stronger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The first true winter on Nerthus 9 was not a season. It was a siege. The temperatures dropped below survivable levels. Subterranean lakes froze solid within hours. The winds screamed like mourning mothers, tearing entire shelter domes from their anchors and flinging them into ravines. Ash storms coated the sky in black for so long that no sun was seen for 36 days. Predators grew bolder in the dark. It was the time most of the galaxy had predicted would be the end. The final extinction phase of the so-called Terran remnant. Instead, it became the beginning of something else. When the skies turned black and the storms came daily, humanity retreated below. Not in fear, but in preparation. The forges carved into the cliffs beneath Sparkback Ridge glowed, like the heart of a dying god. Engineers who once worked in orbital stations now ran smoke-belching furnaces, melting drone frames and reprocessing ceramic armor into blades, hammers, plows, and plates and armor. Thick, crude, layered with bone and reactive paste. Heat-treated. With magma steam, pressurized for toxic winds. Pieces were custom-fitted, strapped with leather, sealed with resin from local bug shells. It wasn't powered. It didn't need to be. It was made for war with the planet itself. Some called it death steel. Others called it skin iron. But they all wore it, even the children. There was no longer a question of survival. Survival was assumed. The new question was control, and to control Nerthus 9, they needed to conquer its fire. The geothermal grid was the first major innovation. Old drone cores were rebuilt, not as weapons or scanners, but as heaters, regulators, and conduits for volcanic heat. Entire tunnels were turned into steam farms, where pipes fashioned from crushed alloy funneled warmth to dozens of hab bunkers at once. These bunkers became districts. The districts became a city, the first city on Nerth-9. They named it not after a founder or a leader, but a Ash Haven. It was not visible from the surface, on purpose. From above, it looked like a crater surrounded by jagged spikes of obsidian, a place of nothing but desolation. But below, it pulsed with life. Fire-fed greenhouses glowed under amber-tinted glass. Steam-powered turbines hummed through the bedrock. Forges rang with the rhythm of hammer and will. Food was grown, not imported. Grown. They'd bioengineered. Root vegetables to survive in acidic dust. Fungi were gene-bent to absorb radiation and convert it into calories. They learned to raise Vermbul's massive, tusked worm creatures, native to the lower caverns, and domesticate them for meat, fat, and hide. At some point, no one remembered exactly when. A phrase began circulating in whispered conversations and carved messages. The planet isn't killing us anymore. It's feeding us. It wasn't just survival. It was evolution. The humans had changed, slowly at first. Their lungs adapted to oxygen breathing through training, then surgery, then generation. Their muscle mass increased. Skin became tougher first. From scars, then through selective breeding, then via chemical therapy. Genetic augmentation had been banned under Earth law, but Earth was dead, and laws meant nothing on a world that murdered the weak. The first human to survive a direct lightning strike was 17. He lost 2 fingers and part of his jaw, but he walked back to the camp unaided. Bones with rebar and synthetic calcium. He spoke again within a week. They called him Flint. He became a symbol not of resilience, but of what came next. More followed. Some were faster, were stronger. One woman walked naked through a toxic river and emerged with her hair turned white and her irises scorched black, but she laughed through the pain. She became a teacher, instructing children on how to chew breathing moss and cough out toxins like phlegm. They began tattooing themselves with black resin and ash ink, not tribal patterns. Maps, records, bloodlines, achievements. Every scar was recorded. Every storm endured etched into skin. They carried their history not in books or data cores, but on their bodies. Then came the first. Organized hunt. Not for food. Not for defense, but for domination. They'd track the largest of the planets. Predators, colossal serpentine beasts with armored fins and thermal vision across the southern ridges for months. They studied its patterns, lured it with carcasses, and pheromone sprays derived from the bugs it fed on. When it finally emerged, roaring and thrashing, 5 dozen humans waited. They didn't use railguns or missiles. They brought nets made of fusion filament, harpoons laced with sedative venom, and firebombs stitched from plasma battery cores. The beast took 15 lives and fell screaming into the ravine. Its corpse was dragged back to shaven, dismantled, studied, skinned, mounted. Its skull now hung above the entrance to the forge. Hollow eyes glowing from within, fitted with reactor coils. A warning, trophy, a promise. This world made monsters. So did we. And in the shadows of old orbital debris, hidden under the ruins of a failed observation post, a small transmitter crackled to life. It wasn't programmed to transmit rescue signals. It sent a single phrase on an open frequency. It's broadcast once. Every 7 days. Nerthus 9. Population 184,392. Status growing. The galaxy didn't respond. It wouldn't for a long time, but the humans weren't waiting. They weren't prisoners anymore. They were natives now, and Nerthus 9. The world meant to kill them had become the forge that made them unstoppable. Asterisk. The signal wasn't supposed to work by the time it was built. Patched together from broken antennae, melted sensor domes, and bundled wire harvested from the bones of long-dead drones, most had stopped believing anyone was listening. No one on Nerthus 9 had spoken of Earth in years. Earth was ash, a memory, the dream of a soft world with breathable skies and calm seas, but that signal crafted deep in the belly of Ashavan wasn't meant to call for help. It was meant to say something. A declaration, the console sparked as it came online. The engineer who oversaw its assembly, a broad-shouldered woman with burn scars across her jaw, didn't announce the launch with a countdown or speech. She pressed a single key, then nodded. The message was short, clear-spoken in galactic standard. To anyone listening, humanity remains. Nerthus 9 did not break us. We are alive. We are evolving. Then the system looped to every 6 hours on every open and encrypted band known to the Council. The message pulsed outward like a heartbeat from the underworld. The galaxy heard it. At first it was dismissed as noise. The signal was weak, full of static. Coalition data processors tagged it as either a corrupted file or an old distress beacon from a dead probe. But it kept returning. It carried human cadence. A team of archivists finally ran it through vocal patterning. The computer flagged one phrase, "Humanity remains." What? That stopped everything. The message was elevated to high security review. Emergency sessions were called because Nerthus 9 was never meant to send signals. It was classified as a communications null zone, a world that chewed through satellites and swallowed transmissions in magnetic storms. If a signal had come from it, then someone had bent physics, brute-forced radiation, K, and cracked chaos itself. Only one species would even attempt such a thing, and more terrifyingly, succeed. The Council panicked quietly. They didn't issue alerts. They didn't go public. Instead, they sent a recon drone, cloaked and armed. equipped with deep scan modules. It took 3 weeks to reach orbit. By then, the humans knew it was coming. They had been watching the stars too. The drone didn't. Survive entry, it wasn't shot down. It wasn't hacked, it was confused. Disoriented by gravitational anomalies caused by geothermal surges and intentionally misaligned mineral fields, the humans had discovered. It crashed into the side of a cliff that didn't appear on the maps because the humans had moved the cliff by hand from orbit. The only readings were confusing. Thermal grids showed multiple population centers, though no official infrastructure existed. Strange shapes glowed with residual energy massive, moving clusters that didn't match known vehicles or fauna. But one visual caught the council's breath. A video feed, retrieved just before the drone failed, showed what appeared to be a human city embedded within a volcanic trench. Lights flickered along the walls. Pipes hissed steam. Walkways glowed with heat signatures. And across the outermost ridge was a shape unmistakable in its message. A massive tower, built from the hulls of old freighters, pointed at the stars. Its peak was shaped like a fist. More troubling than the city were the people the drone had captured. Just a few seconds of biometric footage, but it was enough. The humans were different. Taller, denser, breathing in air that would poison most species in seconds, walking without visors, skin darkened by ash and exposure. Some wore armor fashioned from insect chitin and fused alloy. Others moved in packs, hunting serpent beasts as if it were a game. The data returned to the council. Analysts cross-referenced it with human baselines. The verdict: unrecognizable, physically and culturally divergent. Estimated 78% physiological adaptation, unknown weapon capacity, unknown technology source, unknown political intent. Which meant only one thing: unpredictable. Some council factions argued it was a hoax. Others whispered of a myth one once buried deep in history, that humans improve under pressure. That the worse the conditions, the more they adapt. The term had been used mockingly before. Now it returned with new meaning. Deathworlders. Wasn't a name the humans gave themselves. It was what the galaxy began to call them. Not because they lived on a death world, but because they belonged on one. Back on Nerthus 9, the signal continued. Each time it broadcast, the humans listened to it too. They didn't cheer, they didn't dance. They smiled quiet, knowing iron-lipped grins, because they knew it wasn't a distress call. It was a warning. The galaxy had finally heard. It began with a council dispatched, quiet, clinical, and devoid of emotion. Contact to be re-established with Nerthus 9. Priority: observation. Objective: verification of human viability. They wouldn't admit it was fear. They called it containment. They said it was about ethics, about re-evaluating the outcome of the exile. A routine audit of a formerly hostile species, but buried. In the metadata was a different tone: desperation, because by now, every major civilization in the galaxy had heard the signal. Not just once, not just intercepted in military channels, but shared, echoed, picked up by civilian relays, then media broadcasts, then open-source networks. The message had gone viral, and with it, the question that had burned its way across every CCCC. Species information feed. If humans survived Nerthus 9, what else can they survive? The recon fleet was modest 5 ships, unarmed on paper, but retrofitted with electronic countermeasures. Deflector matrices, and crewed entirely by non-combat diplomats, accompanied by covert security teams. They didn't plan to fight, they planned to watch, to scan, to judge. They approached the outer orbit of Nerthus 9 with caution. The planet rotated slowly, wrapped in storm belts and electromagnetic fog. No satellites, no defense grid. Just a dead rock hiding a secret. Their scanners swept the upper atmosphere. Heat readings returned absurdly complex surface signatures, too ordered for natural tectonics, too scattered for traditional city layouts. And there was that shape, again, clearer now, a massive tower pointed skyward, constructed from Starship. Hulls, freighter parts, and meteor steel. It emitted no beacon, no electronic pulse. It just stood there like it was watching. The diplomatic shuttle detached from the lead, the cruiser, and began its descent, cloaked beneath layers of signal scrambling. Fields. It dropped through the clouds at a cautious angle, touching down on what appeared to be a stone landing platform. The landing pad was hexagonal, smoothed and reinforced with what analysts later realized was compressed volcanic ash fused with bone. Fragments and alloy shavings. Waiting for them were humans, not an army. Not a delegation, just 6 of them, you and Ward, standing still, breathing heavy air like it was nothing, their faces unreadable, their posture relaxed, but ready. As if they had survived first contact more times than the diplomats had. Trained for it, the diplomat stepped out of the shuttle, flanked by guards. She raised a translator. One of the humans stepped forward, a tall, ash-skinned woman with sharp features and something ancient in her eyes. The diplomat cleared her throat and spoke in galactic standard. "We come in peace, representing the High Council. We acknowledge the endurance and adaptation of your people." Offered discussion. The human cut her off, voice low and clean. "No." The diplomat hesitated. "We haven't offered terms yet." The woman took a single step forward. "You came to see if we'd crawl back. To check if we were worth talking to now that we've survived the grave you've buried us in." Another human. Broader stepped up beside her. His arms were wrapped in burn scar tattoos. His eyes were jet black from radiation burns, and still unblinking. "You think we want your apology? We don't. You think we want reparations? We don't. You think this was punishment?" He paused, then smiled just a little. Training. Behind them, the tower hummed, not with energy, not with sound, but with presence. As if it knew what was about to happen. The diplomat adjusted her stance. "The council is offering observation rights, medical aid, technology exchange." "No," the woman said again, and then she looked to the sky. A pulse of light erupted from the tower. Not a weapon. Not a threat. A signal. It tore through every frequency on the recon ship. Flooding channels, overloading sensors. It wasn't data. It was a map. A blueprint. The humans had reverse-engineered council propulsion systems, improved them, rebuilt them. For volcanic stability, high-gravity reinforcement, and manual override. They hadn't just survived. They had begun launching their own vessels. The diplomat turned, her voice shaking now. "You're building ships. You're leaving." The woman nodded once. "We're not coming back to join your council." She pointed to the stars. "We're going out there. And when the rest of the galaxy meets us, it won't be as refugees, or exiles, or victims." Her voice turned cold. "It will be as the descendants of Nerthus, as Deathworlders." The guards raised their weapons instinctively. The humans didn't even flinch. The diplomat, pale now, gave a single command through her neural uplink. "Withdraw. Immediately." The shuttle lifted, but as it climbed back into the sky, passing through layers of cloud and magnetized ash, one of the escort ships caught a feed from the tower. A single phrase broadcast only once. Encrypted and direct slipped into there. "Translation array, contact denied. Watch your skies." The recon fleet left orbit within the hour, and the council? They never sent another in the months that followed. Unregistered ships bearing Nerthus engine signatures began appearing near asteroid mining belts, derelict stations, and frontier colonies. Always unarmed. Always calm, but the message was clear. Humanity wasn't coming back. They were expanding. Asterisk, no one knew where the first human built. Starship would appear. It wasn't announced. No parades. No diplomatic escort. Just a shadow on a scanner. A blip on a radar. A whisper that something not supposed to exist had slipped out of the graveyard planet called Nerthus 9 and into the stars. The ship had no name in any known registry. It didn't ping on Coalition protocols. Bore no faction colors, no signal lights, no ID beacons. It was quiet, matte black and jagged, like it had been mined from the bones of a collapsed moon. From a distance, it looked more like a weapon than a vessel, but it moved like something that should not be. It crossed systems with engines no one could trace. It accelerated against gravitational resistance, skimmed the edge of a gas giant, slingshot around a binary star, and entered the edge markets, the busiest border zone in Council. Space without warning. That was where everyone saw it. Thousands of ships, merchant cruisers, pirate scrappers, patrol craft. All watched as the first Deathworlder ship emerged in real space without escort, without fanfare, and hovered silently over the orbital docks of Station Voxhar-6. The station's security hailed. No response, they repeated. No response. Then, without firing a shot, the ship rotated, faced outward, projected a visual transmission in every language used in Council space. We do not come in chains. We do not come with apologies. We come because we endured. Then the ship blinked out of real space, slipping into an FTL corridor that didn't match any coalition signature. It was gone. The galaxy erupted. The news networks swarmed with speculation. The phrase, "We endured," became a slogan overnight. Some hailed the humans as a miracle. Others warned of a threat emerging from the ash. Analysts debated how a population left for dead had built a starship in a planetary graveyard with no access to trade, aid, or technological infrastructure. Behind closed doors, the fear was very real, because it wasn't just one ship. Weeks later, another appeared. Then another. Different designs, some small and sleek like stingers, others massive and broad-shouldered like mobile refineries or colony. Barges. And with each new vessel came a signal not of war, but of presence. The Deathworlders were not just surviving, they were spreading. They didn't ask for recognition, didn't attend council sessions, they didn't join planetary unions. They simply settled. One such settlement occurred on Carthasate, a resource-rich planet claimed by a mid-tier coalition corporation. When a Deathworlder ship landed there, the miners were ordered to force the humans off-planet. 3 days later, the corporation withdrew. The mining base had been rebuilt, improved. Reinforced structures, better filtration, safer tunnels. A new power grid, and the Deathworlders? They had already moved on, leaving behind nothing but a plaque bolted to a steel wall. We don't take, we build. On the frontier, tales grew. A stranger, a pirate vessel, cornered a Deathworlder transport, believing it to be slow prey. Only one fragment of a transmission was recovered. You may fire when ready. They already did. No wreckage was ever found. But the pirate vessel was never seen again. Another report detailed a freighter that had lost life support near a neutron storm. Deathworlders arrived without being called. They patched the hole manually, fed the crew, left before names were exchanged. They didn't need thanks. They had already done more than anyone expected back on Nurthus 9. Things had changed too. Oshavan, once a buried forge city, had become a launch nexus. Every crater, every ridge, every scarred valley now bore the signs of shipbuilding. Vertical elevators punched through crust to bring starcraft to the surface. Fuel processors lined magma veins. Actual orbital tethers were being constructed from filament steel, anchored by towers laced with lightning rods and seismic shock dampeners. They had turned the most hostile planet in the known galaxy into a crucible of industry. And still, they asked for nothing. They didn't seek revenge. They didn't broadcast demands. They just left the door open. Some species noticed. Bad. The Volex, long persecuted by their own council member state, migrated an entire village to Nurthus 9. With nothing but hopes and a half-working shuttle, they were taken in, no ceremony. No questions. Just one rule spoken by the first Deathworlder they met. If you help, you're one of us. If you harm, you won't get a second chance. By the end of that year, 5 more refugee colonies followed. By the next, Deathworlder-built habitats were orbiting 3 separate stars. The Council tried to catch up. They attempted negotiations, treaties, embargoes, bribes. But the humans had no central leader, no bureaucracy to target. no throne to seduce. They had learned from exile that dependence breeds chains. And now they had none. One final moment sealed the galaxy's recognition. A council ambassador was granted audience on the outer rim world of Valen's Reach, where a Deathworlder research vessel had recently terraformed an acid moon into a breathable biosphere using volcanic aerosol redirection, a feat thought impossible. The ambassador arrived with cameras, speeches, honors prepared. They were met by a man in heat armor and ash-caked boots. He looked up from a growing hydro farm and asked, plainly, "You want a speech?" The ambassador nodded, smiling. Deathworlder stared at the planted rose for a long time, then turned back and spoke just 3 words. "This is the speech." Then he walked away. They had no empire, no flag, no anthem. But when the galaxy looked up and saw Deathworlder, ships drifting among the stars, one truth echoed in every mind: they sent humans to die, and made them stronger instead. Long after the last spark of the war had gone cold. Long after the Council officially erased the Exile Order from its archive, the name Nerthus 9 still caused a quiet shiver to run through political rooms. Command decks, war colleges alike. No one said it aloud in meetings. No one wrote it in policy. But everyone remembered. Because from the moment humanity re-entered the stars, everything changed. Not through conquest, not through terror. Through undeniable presence, the Deathworlders didn't declare dominance. They didn't overthrow anyone. They simply stood where they were once meant to die, and refused to move, and the galaxy adjusted around them. History would eventually mark the transformation as the Nerthus line, the tipping point where humanity passed from anomaly to inevitability. Before Nerthus, they were a disruptive species, loud and inefficient. After Nerthus, they became a standard for impossible adaptation. Species once considered genetically perfect began adopting human biome upgrades, resistance, injectors, hormone controllers, neural conditioning, all pioneered in the underground labs of a world never meant to be habitable. Training academies across the galaxy added new curriculum tracks, Deathworlder protocols. These classes didn't teach how to kill humans. They taught how to endure like them. How to survive when the power grid fails, when air burns, and predators don't sleep. They taught how to think, like humans, and even that wasn't enough. Because humans didn't just think to survive. They thrived by outlasting everything else, in the outer sectors. Old powers began to decay. Corrupt council seats collapsed under the weight of their own irrelevance. Border worlds once left to rot were rebuilt by Deathworlder fleet scrap-forged ships made from volcanic alloy and starburned steel, crewed by survivors who never asked who owned the territory. They didn't need permission to help. They only needed a reason, and survival was always reason enough. It started as whispers. If you need rescue, call the Deathworlders. If your planet's failing, signal the Ashburn. They don't come for reward. They come because that's who they are. Soon, those whispers became truth. Deathworlder envoys replaced full diplomatic corps in disaster zones. Coalitions once hesitant to share information began adopting Deathworlder urban planning techniques, high-pressure resistance domes, modular survival blocks, trauma-resilient architecture that could be built by hand in any weather. Even on a Class 3 planet, the galaxy had spent centuries chasing elegance, aesthetics, effortless technology. Now it learned the value of brutal functionality, because the Deathworlders had built something far stronger than cities or ships. They had built a culture that refused to collapse. Still, there were doubters, old warlords, fringe species, mercenary clans who remembered humans as a nuisance, emotional, fragile, temporary. One such group attempted to siege Ether Drift, civilian habitat maintained jointly by humans and the insectoid Garou. The attackers expected resistance. They had expected plasma fire and automated drones. Instead, they found empty walkways, sealed bulkheads, corridors rigged to vent them one by one into vacuum. The Deathworlders didn't need to shoot. They made the station itself the weapon. Not one human was injured. 3 hours after the attack failed, a single Deathworlder ship returned to the attacker's stronghold. It landed, opened its bay, and deployed not soldiers, but tools, food, and medical kits. The message was simple. You lost. But we don't waste life. No retaliation. No retribution. Just a chance to rebuild. Because the humans had learned something the rest of the galaxy hadn't. When you survive a death world, you don't need to prove you're strong. You prove it by helping others survive their own. And so, the legacy of Nerthus spread like gravity unseen, constant, impossible to escape. They never became conquerors. They became something far more. Terrifying to tyrants and warmongers. They became reliable, predictable in their morality, ruthless in their resilience, unshakable in their resolve. They didn't burn empires, they replaced them. Quietly, patiently, like root-splitting stone. Centuries later, the Council would be gone absorbed into a newer coalition of species bound, not by trade or ideology, but by respect for the shared fire that came from those who had endured the worst and walked back out of it still standing, in its central hall, no longer called a chamber, but simply the circle. There hung a sculpture, a cracked, blackened piece of hull, old, scarred, reforged, etched across its face in every language ever recorded. In letters carved by hand, asterisk, asterisk, they banished us to die. We learned to live. We came back to show you how. Asterisk. Asterisk, and beneath it, smaller, built from the bones of Nerthus 9, by the ones who refused to vanish, by the Deathworlders, by humans.